Welcome back to the Ghosted podcast, and insert spooky music here because we're actually taking this ghosted to the next level for Halloween, and we're not just going to be talking about, getting ghosted in terms of dating, but we're going to be talking about actual ghosts, paranormal activity, and I have a three-peat guest here, which I'm super excited. And Jessi, this is your second time on the show.
Yeah, I always get holidays.
You
Last one
do,
was
because
Valentine's Day.
oh my God. Okay, so you're the holiday queen. Now we got to continue our tradition. But for those of you who haven't listened to episodes with Talia and Jessi, let me just do a quick intro. So Talia is a licensed marriage and family therapist. I almost flipped them. And we have talked about all kinds of fun things on Ghosted, like anxious attachment styles, dating as a badass, assertive woman, all kinds of things. But you have some very special knowledge in this area of spookiness that we're going to get to. And Jessi, who runs the production company that puts this podcast together, also has some very spooky knowledge. So, Talia, do you want to kick it off? And kind of give us the background so people know what they're in for.
Yes. So when I was in graduate school, we got to take a class if we wanted like a study abroad, semester abroad, but you did most all of the learning here in America, and then you got to travel to whatever country. So the special topic that I picked was in Italy, and we spent an intensive amount of time studying demonic possession and exorcism as it relates to mental health, and what countries view it as like a special experience that happens to some people to be possessed or oppressed or obsessed, which we can talk about the different levels of that, and what it was like to study when we got to Italy under a professor who had been in the room when this has happened. And priests are really the only ones who can do exorcisms if you're looking at it from like the Catholic faith perspective. So we studied all about the rite, demonic possession, all like parapsychology, paranormal activity, abnormal beliefs, which about 50% of the world's population holds at least one paranormal belief. So when we think about spooky, I'm sure other people have their own belief systems, superstitions, you name it, anything, we covered it. And it was a very wicked semester. So I will leave it at that. But that is my specialized extra training when it comes to how this relates to mental health.
Oh, so cool. Yeah, of course we're going to bring it back around to mental health, dating, all of it.
Yes.
It's still going to be relevant to our single listeners, but it's Halloween. Even though I look like I'm celebrating Valentine's Day, if you're not watching the video, you should go check out my outfit. It's very Valentine's Day-esque. I'll repeat this next year. And Jessi, fill us in. How did you come to end up on the Halloween episode?
Yeah, well, so, Abby, you don't know this, but I was raised, like, really on the woo-woo side of things. So I was raised, like, ghosts are real, some people can talk to them, you can talk to them, you just have to be listening, kind of thing. And so all my friends were always just like, we're going to take Jessi to haunted and abandoned places and make her see what's up.
Oh, my God.
And I also wanted to be goth as a child, so I think that influenced a lot of my interests in the spooky and the paranormal. Ooh. I told my mom when I was 7, she was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, a goth. What's your favorite color? Black. So
I love it. And again, if you're not watching this YouTube video of us, you probably should, because, we all got killer outfits on, and Jessi's lipstick especially is on point for Halloween.
Thank you.
Wait, also, Jessi, you were saying, would you communicate with ghosts? Can we go there? Like, what went on?
It depends on, like, what your views are on all of that, but I think yes, and I respect if people think no. That's fine. But
right.
Yeah.
Ooh. Yeah, we might have some controversial opinions on this episode. So just disclaimer, argue with us. We welcome it. Send us a message. And we're happy to debate. So I guess we can kind of start with, when we think of, demonic possession, I think of horror movies. I think of The Exorcist or, someone crawling on the ceiling with their limbs all messed up. But Talia, based on everything that you learned in this program, like, what does it actually mean when someone is possessed?
So many people think of what it's like in a movie, and
right.
It's scary and creepy. And it definitely can look like that or can be that, but not all the time does it jump to cinematic levels of what we see.
I would imagine.
There are 3 levels to what we're experiencing or what a person is experiencing when there is some sort of entity or dark force that's taking over them. So when you're taking a look at it, possession is kind of the final level when the spirit or the demon has occupied your mind, your soul, your body. So it has almost like full control. And then the levels beneath that would be obsession and then oppression. So if it's only in the mind level and you're not thinking as clearly or you're not acting as clearly, you just feel like something's going on. There's something inside of me that doesn't really feel like me and it's making me think differently. That's more where we think of obsession, like obsessive thoughts. And then oppression is when it's kind of taken control of your body, or you feel like you have bad luck, bad things happen to you, you're unlucky, you might increase your levels of superstition because you're noticing, oh, well, I didn't do this and this thing happened. It's kind of messing with your day-to-day life. And then the full-blown possession is when it's taken all forms of you and you're not yourself. That is more what you see when you look at like Hollywood and media being a bit obviously theatrical to prove a point, but a bit more accurate, that you don't have a sense of self anymore and you have become fully possessed by a demon or an evil spirit. Pretty true. So at varying levels, this can be seen in different cultures as a gift. If you can talk to ghosts, see things that aren't there that other people can't see, things that only you can see. Other cultures can see that or interpret that as they are the chosen one. They have a special gift. They are honorable in some way to have been chosen. And there's almost like a respect or deference given all the way to being worshipped as some sort of secret entity. And then in more Americanized Western cultures, it's more stigmatized and we're more likely to jump to diagnosing it as a mental illness or attempt to diagnose it as a mental illness. There's a lot of research papers from that semester that we talked about when we were using the DSM-5. It doesn't accurately cover a lot of these other cultural disorders, if you will, or cultural experiences. So we might look at something and think somebody is possessed, and another culture could look at it and be like, they are gifted, they are the chosen one. So I think culture matters and the way that we talk about it matters. Also, the closest thing that westernized culture can use in a day-to-day to relate would be dissociative identity disorder. It used to be called multiple personality disorder. And when somebody has DID, they have a host self that is their true self, and then they have alters. And when you go through severe childhood trauma, you develop these alters as a coping skill. And when you have this as a full-blown disorder, you switch into those alters typically without you having to think about it. You can actively switch into one, but they usually come up as more of a protective factor. So we could argue, and some have argued, that that's a form of something taking hold of you, you not having control of that. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a demonic possession or a demonic force, but that's kind of a parallel that we can draw, as if you're acting so unlike yourself, that could feel like you're being taken over.
Right. And maybe people who aren't really believers and maybe that there is something else out there, that kind of helps them maybe explain it and figure out what's going on. And what about, like, are there certain mental illnesses like that one that could be associated with like some of the other levels of
I would say some of the other, and I will butcher them, so I'm not even going to make an attempt to name them in other cultures. I will take a look and see if I can find one of my papers that I know references them, but there are other cultural experiences or diagnoses that we would see in other countries, like schizophrenia. We see that here, we see that in other countries. What are the kinds of thoughts that the person is having, and are they having certain delusions, which is like a false belief, or are they having hallucinations, seeing or smelling something that isn't there? Are they perceptive? Are they tuned into another world, or are they having a mental illness? So that's another example of a diagnosis that we would know here, that some people would look at and go, that person's crazy, and label them as such. Or somebody could be like, oh, they're the chosen one. They clearly have a connection to a spirit world, especially if they're having more demonic hallucinations or obsessions, that we could look at that and go, okay, maybe there is something deeper there. And if they have been engaging in something that would open a portal or a door, the likelihood is higher that it is some sort of potentially an obsession or an oppression that's happening if we're tempting fate in that way, as it were. So if we're going looking for something or trying to invite that kind of dark energy into our life, it will show up if we create a window for it or a door for it.
Whoa, okay, rewind. Window or door. Jessi, you might have something to add to this too. Like, please chime in. Go.
I think like a really good example in the Western world that we'd recognize as a window or door would be like a Ouija board.
Exactly.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, wait. So talk about Ouija boards. I feel like sometimes I'm like, is someone just pushing it? Like,
I
let's
will
talk
let
about
Jessi start with this one.
that.
So I've only ever used a Ouija board a few times because that was something growing up. Everybody was like, no, don't touch that. Like, even being on the woo-woo end of things, everyone was like, no, don't mess with that. And so the few times that I have used it, we would do like a big protection ritual beforehand, and then nothing would happen.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, and so what is this protection ritual?
I mean, it depends. It's not very, it's very chill. We would just be like, I'll say together, like, we're protected, we're safe, we don't invite anything negative into this space. Just kind of like repeat after me. Just setting like a good intention, which I think, you know, we do that all the time with everything else that we do. You know, you wake up in the morning, you might have your coffee and be like, today's going to be a good day. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we feel like we have this fascination with, you know, inviting bad things in, but then we, at least me, like, get so freaked out. Like, I definitely did a Ouija board once, and I swear it was in a house that was totally haunted, that a family member of mine had died in. I feel like I'm, like, getting creeped out even just telling the story. This episode is not good for me. But, you know, you're like, this can't just be, okay, someone else is pushing the thing along. Like, I don't know. You want to believe it's more, too. Like, I wonder where this fascination comes from. Do you guys have any ideas, thoughts?
Fascination with, like, the other side or the other world.
Yeah, the other world, dark things, you know?
I think in some ways it can come from being, like, if you were raised in a certain religion or raised in a certain spirituality or faith or lack of faith, either of them, we might be curious for what we weren't exposed to growing up, and then we might not have any curiosity for what we weren't exposed to growing up. So if we're told, especially because the subconscious mind can't really process negatives, if we're told, don't do this, stop doing that, this is bad, wrong, etc., especially if you're a teenager, you're going to be like, wait, I'm really curious about that, let me try this, like Jessi was mentioning, kind of, or alluding to. And there is something curious about dark forces or what else could be out there, and then we hear about it with ghost stories, etc. I think sometimes people's curiosity comes from that they've had that experience, but they don't have really words for it. So when they see a show or read a book or have some sort of media that could explain what happened to them, they go down the rabbit hole with it because it's like, wait a second, that's what happened to me when I was staying at this hotel or haunted or whatever. And there definitely are dark forces in the world. Like, there is light and dark, and there's good and evil. And I would hope that we are being, like you were saying, Jessi, like, protective of ourselves if we are embarking on that curious endeavor, because there are some things where you might not know what's coming on the other side. And so you want to make sure that you're, like, setting the energetic tone and being protective of yourself if you are one of those people who is curious.
Yeah.
Ooh. And do you guys think that anyone could potentially have an interaction with a spirit, ghost, you know, whatever you want to call it? Or is it maybe like you have to be a believer, like this exists?
I think that anyone can, but someone who doesn't believe in it is going to be more likely to assume that there's another explanation.
Yes.
You know, like,
Right.
people will be like, oh, the lights were flickering. And, you know, I'm not the one who's going to say, yes, that's a ghost. No, that's not a ghost. But if you do believe in ghosts, you're going to be like, maybe it was a ghost. And if you don't, you're going to be like, oh, I got to reset the fuse or something.
Yes. And depending on, because I've had trippy experiences before where I've been talking to a friend and the Alexa goes off or Siri goes off or something else happens where you're just like, what the heck? Or the light shut off and on, or you see a flickering. Being perceptive of what was happening before, during, and after these potentially paranormal events can also help a person not jump to all these conclusions because there is something to be said for kind of a placebo effect. Like if you're telling like, oh, it's a sign and it's going to happen, you could see one like plane flying over in the shadow. You're like, see, that was it. That was all the sign I needed. I think you have to be open to it, but also not forcing it, while also being protective that you're not welcoming in the dark spirits. So it's like a lot to manage, I would say, but it depends on what you're looking at. So I was talking to my friend and like the Alexa went on, the light shut off, whatever else. And I was like, oh, what the heck? And none of us said anything that would have caused that, minus like we were talking about more spiritual paranormal stuff. And I was like, all right, let's get the sage, let's get the Palo Santo, let's get all this stuff to cleanse it, let's open the windows and do some little, like, if you're nice, you can stay, if you're not, you have to leave, you're not welcome here. So I think you have to be open to it, like Jessi was saying, and not maybe not overread into it. But if we are open to that spiritual side of the world, there is going to be, again, the light and the dark to it also.
Right. That's what I was going to kind of ask too, is like, are there kind of what you think are good spirits, good ghosts, bad ghosts? I mean, I don't know. It's also fascinating. And it's all things that I feel like sometimes can't really be defined, which is maybe why it's so interesting to so many people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. Crazy.
There can be good and bad. I think if we think of like praying to a guardian angel, asking spirit for help or guidance, anything that we might associate with a positive association with spirituality, we seek that out. Many people know, like you say a prayer, you say a mantra, or whatever it might be, you have an agreement. Even when you're doing Reiki, you kind of clear the energetic area, you ask the spirit guides for help, etc. That's seen as a positive invitation to the good spirits that we hope show up. And like with anything, there might be some unwelcome spirits that we weren't really planning on having happen or like noticing come up. And so being clear of like what the intention is, I think is super important when we're calling on some other guides for help. And if we start to see some kind of wonky stuff happen in your life, depending if you're religious or spiritual, there's different cleansing rituals that people can do too. You can sage, you can Palo Santo, you can call a priest to come bless your house with holy water. You can spray holy water in your house yourself if you're more Catholic or Christian. There's other protective measures that you can put in place, like on a day-to-day basis, almost like a one-a-day vitamin to keep yourself cleansed spiritually.
Yeah.
Right.
I totally agree. I'll also say, though, I think some of the things that we think of by name as being bad are really just intimidating or misunderstood, just because it's like, oh, well, that's a demon in the Bible doesn't mean that spirit is evil and out to get you or anything, especially when we look at like the historical context of a lot of the things listed as demons in the Bible were the pagan gods of those regions before Christianity started to expand. So it's like, you know, if you think of like a demon I would be pretty mad too if I were like a deity and everybody started coming and making my people not believe in me anymore, you know?
Yeah.
Whoa, that's an interesting perspective for sure. Oh my God.
We talked about that also. We got to tour a closed down mental institution, which was super creepy. So back in, this was in Italy, but back in history, there was a really large concentration of mental illness and schizophrenic population in Italy, and the mental hospitals were starting to shut down, and so the people had to go somewhere. So I don't know if it's still the case now, but years ago, Sri Lanka had one of the highest concentrations of mental illness, specifically schizophrenia. And so there's not like a nature-nurture debate, but obviously if you move it geographically from one area to another area, you're going to see that high concentration, and then they're going to perpetuate in the population, et cetera. So you can kind of trace certain mental illness back. And when we were also at that closed down mental hospital, kind of touring the grounds, you could tell there was some unrest, because not everybody who passes on to the other side did so by choice, did so peacefully, did so with finished business completely taken care of. I think that is also a part of it too, that not everybody who passes on or is on the other side was treated well. They might be still experiencing not human emotion in that case, but that air of like the vendetta, the revenge, the I want to be believed in, and they don't see themselves maybe as a dark source, but to Jessi's point, they want to be believed in, and I don't like when people are going to try and make people not believe in me in either direction. And that's why we don't see in Western cultures we have such a high media prevalence, you don't really hear about whether it actually is happening or not. There could be a reporting bias. You don't hear a lot about possessions or exorcisms, because if I were the devil or a demon, I like to work in the dark of the night, and I don't want to be seen, and I don't want to be outed, so I can continue to do my dark work. So I'm going to pick other countries that don't have as high of media publicized coverage of anything, and so I'm going to work my evil or work my magic, depending on whatever the term you want to use is, in other countries where I can actually get away with it and do so under kind of the cover of darkness. So we studied that also.
Yes. And this might be a silly example. This might be a silly example, but sometimes I think of like the Bermuda Triangle, and I know the Bermuda Triangle has kind of been debunked, but that's the region where Columbus first landed. So would anybody be surprised if there are these really angry ancestral spirits because they were like slaughtered in like a genocide?
Fair.
Right? Yeah. Looking at it in context.
Oh my God. And it's just so interesting. I mean, Talia, what you were saying of like, you know, I can get away with it. Because in America, we're so obsessed if like something like that happened. We'd be like, oh my God, it's on TikTok. It's everywhere.
Netflix, right. The demon's like, really, TikTok? Come on, guys. I really got to do some possessions here. This is really throwing me off, because people are going to live stream it immediately. He's not going to go where it's going to be harder for him to work. He's going to go where it would be easier to get away with the goal of possessing somebody, oppressing, obsession, etc. At least the way that we were taught.
So we're safe here right now because, like, I'm even freaking myself out. My dog's making all these weird noises next to me. I'm like, you know, we're doing a podcast, so we're safe. We're good.
I think if you believe that you're safe, then you are. And if you feel creepy, whatever higher power you believe in, tune into them, tap in, and maybe do a cleansing, a saging, holy water, whatever helps you to feel safe and to create that barrier with the negative or darker aspects of the spiritual world or of the other side. I think that's a necessary thing to help you feel. And it's a creepy topic, so it's okay to feel on edge too.
Oh, totally. Well, and like for me, part of my weekly housekeeping is making sure my home protection is up to date. You know, like, got to make sure. So,
yeah.
Jessi, what does your home protection consist of? Can you share?
So mine consists of some vaguely pagan and a little bit Wiccan stuff. So I have a sigil that I designed that's my protection sigil. And I also put black salt, which is salt mixed with like soot or ash, along all the entrances, windows, and doorways of my home.
Ooh, okay. So people taking notes, if you want to have your own rituals and protection. I feel like you both might have some good ghost stories to share, you know, not dating related. Anything interesting, creepy? Anything to be interesting to share?
I have some creepy stories from that trip and like leading up to it specifically.
I could imagine. Let's hear it.
Where do I start? I would say like anecdotally, most every person who was in that class ended up having a health crisis of some sort or an interpersonal crisis of some sort. And one of the girls had a dog and she was moving during the time it happened, and the books were stacked so high and the dog's like a chihuahua, like a little dog. And the dog backed itself up and took a poop on the top book, which happened to be the Bible. Very weird. Could be nothing, could be something. Whoa. We don't know. I know I had a lot of health problems and I had a lot of sleep issues too. And I would wake up in cold sweats. I would wake up with, mind you, I am so apprehensive about the paranormal world. Whatever movies we had to watch and write a paper, I would watch them muted. I would screen scroll through while also reading the Wikipedia thing because I was so terrified of ever watching like the full thing or inviting it in. And it still inadvertently happened. I had a dream one time where I felt like I was leaving my body, like my soul was leaving my body, and I was hearing voices and I was feeling presences in the room. And I definitely think even prior to that, which is one of the reasons why I was so curious about the class, I had struggled with a lot of feeling like I was between the worlds in college almost, like definitely some kind of oppression going on. And so much so that when it was happening in college, I called the priest at UCLA and I was like, you need to come bless my apartment. Like some shit is going down. I didn't say that in the voicemail. But then it kind of alleviated like after the phone call. So it was very weird. It was like the thing that was in the apartment didn't want to leave. And then fast forwarding to the experience in grad school, when we actually arrived in Italy, and I can say this now because everything is cleared up, there was a kid who lied about who he was on the trip. Used a totally fake name, had been on pretty much every study abroad, which, if you know the devil, he would like to work in darkness, so he wants to work in whatever country he can. And study abroads are expensive, so he'd been to multiple. That was already a red flag. While we were in Mass with the Pope, our cameras stopped working completely, and he started to look ill like Professor Quirrell when he got near Harry Potter. And he was like not doing well. He's like, I have to leave. He left. We said some prayers on our cameras. They started working again. I still get like chills to this day. He got in a fight with somebody on the trip and then ended up coming back, and then they had to like sequester him away because clearly like you can't get in a fight with somebody in Italy. And he like had broken his arm or something happened where he was going to get sent home. And we walked out and all of us were on edge, and he had a very creepy experience like walking one of the girls home. She was kind of nervous and she was holding onto his arm just to cross the street. And he looked at her in like a very creepy voice, was like, don't touch me. But it didn't seem like him because he didn't talk like that. Very unsettling. Started to just basically mentally collapse over the course of the trip. And our teachers found out that he wasn't who he said he was. And he actually had been arrested for felony animal abuse for throwing his ex-roommate's cat against a mirror and killing it. Like, he was not well. Started freaking out when our teachers confronted him about that, and he got sent home. Unfortunately, a couple years later, he ended up taking his own life. So I just don't think he was doing well mental health wise. But if we piece together all of these other very weird anecdotes on the trip, he was definitely, something was going on with him, because we'd be walking and like see lizards or frogs, which anybody knows kind of reptiles are more of the sign of like darkness, etc. And even when we were watching The Right in class, very good movie, by the way, that scene, there was almost kind of like a joy that I saw. It was very unsettling. And to top it all off, and then I want to hear Jessi's stories. When we were traveling, the group I was with wanted to go to one country prior to Italy and one country after. And we got there and he was like, oh yeah, I just came from whatever country it was, Amsterdam, I think. And I think I'm going to go back after, because over the course of the trip, he heard us talking about it. He's like, oh wait, I'm going to go. I'm like, why, if you have no friends who live in Amsterdam and you just went there, would you want to go again while us three girls are going to be traveling? Like, very creepy and unsettling. And he would just be on his phone a lot, lurking. Like, it was real creepy. So that's within that class experience of it. I have a lot of other experiences when it comes to that, just on a personal level. But I was raised Catholic, and now I'm more spiritual, so I feel like I have all of the, like, I have the sage, the Palo Santo, the holy water, the crosses, the rosaries. Like, I have the full protective cycle.
You got everything at your disposal.
All the boxes checked. But yeah, that mass with the Pope and watching the cameras not function, none of ours were working. He leaves, they start working. I was like, that's enough. We're good. That's enough for me. I'm all set. Very unsettling. Yeah.
My palms are sweating right now. If you're listening and you're feeling the same way, just like let us know.
Super creepy. Ooh. Yeah. God, what about you, Jessi? You have some good ones.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say my intuition says that kid was cursed. I don't know, but
yeah, there was some,
like, absolutely, like, yeah. I've always had a very strong like intuition, and I was raised to use it, not to ignore it. My mom would be like, hey, I don't think you should take that road home tonight. And I would be like, okay, I'll take a different road. And then I would find out there was a huge accident on the road I was going to take. And it would have been like right when I was there, and I could have been involved in it, type of thing, you know? Yeah. And then I've had that experience like with me telling other people. So that's very surface level. I've always just felt more connected. Like would feel like there were people watching me or standing behind me a lot. I used to see shadow people out of the corner of my eyes a lot. And I mentioned that to a therapist I had, and she was like, well, do they bother you? And I was like, no. She goes, I mean, let me know if it gets worse or they start talking.
That's good. Yeah.
Talia approves.
Yeah, that's a good way to handle that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I have always, in my spiritual experiences, if I hear something, I don't physically hear it. Or if I see something, it's more like a visualization. I've never experienced like a true like hallucination or something like that. Except for one time when I was 24 hours no sleep, but that was because of the sleep.
That might be something else. Yeah.
I like to see a fail safe. Yeah.
Yeah. When I was in school, in high school and in undergrad, my friends were like, "Oh, Jessi knows stuff. We want to take her spooky places." And so we were up at a friend and I were up at an abandoned hotel in Pine, Colorado. It's on land that's like property of Denver Water, but the gate is never closed, so you can just walk right up to it. And he was like, "What's the deal? What's going on here?" And I was like, "This is kind of dumb. Like, I don't really want to do this today." But I turned to him and I was like, "I think there's someone named George in there." And later, when we were, down from the mountain and we had cell service, we looked it up, and it turned out that a guy named George Ballou had actually burnt down the hotel. And what we were looking at was the, historical reconstruction that had since also been abandoned.
What?
Yeah.
Wow. Ghosted had taken a real spooky turn today.
I also, I have a friend who lives in a house she's like, "My house is haunted. The ghost name is Dwight." And Dwight plays with her cat all the time, so you'll see the cat playing with something when there's nothing, and you can feel him kind of standing up behind you. But she always said the basement had like a really heavy feeling, so I went down to the basement with her, and it did. It felt very heavy in the basement. And she told me that Dwight had actually killed himself. He had committed suicide in the house. They knew that. And in the basement, one of the rooms was very, very heavy. And I was like, "Hey, do you know how he did it?" And she was like, "Yeah." And I got like an image in my mind of someone hanging. And I was like, "Did he hang himself?" And she was like, "Yeah, that's what he did." So mine have always been more of like, I know something that I don't know how I know.
Yeah.
And then it turns out to be true or accurate. I did have one situation that was actually very scary. I was asleep, and I've always kind of had I can't watch horror movies either, despite loving the spooky stuff, because my imagination goes on. It's like, I watched Insidious when I was 14, and I was like, the ladies in...
don't even get me started on that one.
She's in my room. But so, I was half asleep, and I kind of woke up, and I felt something sitting on my bed, and I thought I saw something creepy, and I was like, no, go to sleep. But I kind of, being raised as spiritual, I have a spiritual team that I can recognize, guides and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I'll go back to sleep. And someone that I recognized was kind of like, no, don't go, no, you got to get rid of that. That's for real. And so I had to get out of bed and do a banishing ritual.
Yeah.
Because as I was trying to go to sleep, there would be images in my mind as I'm trying to fall back asleep of something climbing over me and stuff like that. And I was like, no, I creep myself out. But then I got a very strong gut feeling no, you have to deal with that right now.
Yeah. I had that in college. I would be in the middle of the night, wake up, but it was sleep paralysis. So my brain was awake, but my body was obviously still asleep. And the door would be opening, and someone would be coming in my room and sitting on the edge of my bed and touching me and hurting me, and I couldn't do anything about it. And I had to learn to throw myself awake, basically, get the rosary, get the holy water, do a prayer, pray to Saint Michael. It was a full-time job trying to just feel like a sane person. And my anxiety was at an all-time high. And I remember that feeling coming back that one very specific night in grad school. And if I can find the email that I sent, I remember sending it to my professor. It was a play-by-play account of what had happened, because when I was dealing with all my physical diagnosis stuff the night before, the pain had gotten so bad where I was having the issue. I sprayed holy water on it, and it went away immediately. And this was not with it's not like I had taken Motrin or all this other stuff and it happened to be the timing of it. It was, I looked at my mom, and she is very Catholic, and I was like, what the actual? And she's like, okay, we're going to call a priest tomorrow. It got that intuitive feeling that Jessi was talking about, where you can sense the presence, etc. Our teacher had brought that up, that she was in, and she was raised Catholic. She was in her hotel room in some conference, kind of looking outside the window. You know how you kind of see the reflection back and whatever you're looking out at a hotel. And she was on the phone with her medium, and her medium was saying something like, no, they're in the room with you right now. And she looked back in the reflection and saw like the demon and had to immediately pray to Saint Michael. So like that connection with that other spirit world, we often see it in children too, because they're more susceptible. Their imagination is much stronger and their critical mind hasn't developed yet, which happens around approximately age 8. They are more connected with the spirit world, and both good and evil will be able to connect with them more. That's why kids, when they do report, I saw so-and-so, that's true for them. Like they actually did see that because they have a different relationship and they're closer to the other side they just came from than we are.
Oh my God. I don't know if you guys see me losing my mind over here.
I have a story from when I was a baby that has been retold to me by my mom almost all the time. She says, my grandfather on my dad's side passed away long before I was born. And the way my mom tells it, his name was Jack. And when I was a baby, about 6 months old, didn't know this man or his name, I pointed at an empty corner in our house and I was laughing and I was saying, Jack.
Mm-hmm. Terrifying.
But my mom was all like, oh, hi, Jack. She was just like, hi. If you're really Jack, you can stay. But if you're not, get out. Like,
yeah. Oh my God.
So spooky.
You guys, I need to like go do a Palo Santo thing after this. And selenite and all the things. Oh my God.
Yeah.
This is wild. I had a really kind of interesting experience recently in our house. I woke up in the middle of the night. My mom was staying with us because she was having something done on her place. Mm-hmm. And woke up in the middle of the night and there was like this fog everywhere. I'm not even joking. And the smoke alarm went off. And I thought our house was on fire, something underneath was on fire. I have this like air purifier thing that like senses when the air needs to be cleaned more, so it turns on like at a higher, volume. And that thing was going crazy. And we're all just like, what in the fuck? Sorry, we're saying on the podcast, is going on. And so we call the fire department, they come out. And of course we're all, we got like 3 dogs here, 3 people. We're all like, what are we going to do? The fire department comes and they even are walking around super confused. They're like, it doesn't really seem like smoke, but like we see what you're talking about. There's this weird like fog, mist, whatever in the air. They went under the house. They couldn't find anything. Still, I am like, I don't know what was going on, but we did like lots of sage after that.
Yeah. My brother, when we were little, he's older, but when we were little, he would have these dreams about these evil goats, which is like a demonic animal typically association, at the end of the hallway. And he would wake up and panic and go out to like run down to go in my parents' room because he was already having a nightmare, and he would turn down the hallway and see the goats chasing him into like my parents' bedroom. And they called a priest, they did a blessing, and since that day he like never had the nightmare again. But talk about that terrifying experience, especially at young ages. I'm sure there are many things, and I had a lot of people around me, not because I caused it, obviously, just my parents were older when they had me, so I understand there's like science to why this happened, but a lot of death from a very young age. And I think that can also have you feel more intensely and develop more of those like clairsentience, clairvoyance, empath nature, because you are so connected to the other side in that way, and you keep getting those hits or those reminders every time somebody crosses over to the other side. So I don't think all spirituality is a negative experience, and if it's being a positive visit, it can feel comforting. It's when it's more of that haunting, oppressive, heavy, negative energy in the room, or there's something sensing. I worked with somebody once, and I was sitting in my chair and they were sitting on the couch. They're like, oh, I see spirits, whatever. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm open-minded. Sounds like much like Jessi's therapist was. And then the person was like, oh yeah, no, I can sense spirit. There's actually one behind you right now. And I took everything in me not to shit my pants immediately. And I was just like, oh, okay. Yeah, I've seen it a few times. I'm like, very interesting. If you ever want to share more, please let me know. And if I weren't their therapist, I would have been so curious to be like, what? Can you tell me everything? Will it haunt me? Like, I had so many questions, but not that was the time to do it. But it was a very interesting experience being in the room with somebody who was more on that very spiritual medium, the Claire's side of the world. It was very trippy.
Whoa. Yeah. Oh my God. Well, I hope that if you're listening to this, you've been fully just mind blown, freaked out. I don't know. Wherever you're at, like, we're probably there with you, or I am. My hands are still sweating. But I think I wanted to bring up, because I think we could probably tell ghost stories all day. And also, if you want to tell us your ghost story, you could DM us like an audiogram to @ghostedthepodcast on Instagram, because I feel like it'd kind of be fun for all of us to listen to more. Yeah. Maybe we can make actual paranormal ghost stories and dating ghost stories, you know.
Both kinds of ghosts.
Yeah, right. I don't know which one I'd prefer, honestly. Probably paranormal ghosting, more so. And Jessi, you have kind of worked some of this into dating. I mean, in a way, this is my like really poor transition to bring up that we have to bring up that you have gone on dates to the cemetery.
Yeah, I've always had interest on the spookier side of things, and often dressed that way too, especially when I'm not working. And so nobody thought it was weird, because I think they were all kind of expecting it. But right. We would go and get pizza, and then we would drive to a cemetery that was open at night. But I think a lot of people don't know this, but there's cemetery etiquette. You don't just walk in and do your thing. We would say like, hey, are we invited? We're not, obviously don't step on people's graves and things like that. But one thing that I always did whenever we did this is I would leave an offering for the cemetery protector, because most cemeteries or graveyards have an entity or spirit, whether that's like an archangel or a spirit guide or something that like sort of guards and protects it. We would leave like a coin or something for the protector, and then we would just like sit in the car and eat pizza or sit on a bench and chill.
Romantic.
It was definitely alone time.
Right.
No one else was there. Except one time someone else was there, and that was a little like, what are you doing here? And they were probably thinking, what are you doing here? So.
Ooh, I like it. Well, and hey, it's like obviously you have something already in common with that person, that they're open to hanging in a cemetery,
That's a good filter.
Good filter. Yeah. That should be on the dating profile. If you're cool to have a date in cemetery, swipe right. Yeah.
People are like, that's not polyamory. You're like, no, it's much more fun. Different P word.
Well, any other final parting ghosty thoughts for Halloween, ladies?
I have one that's about an ex.
Ooh. That's haunting you.
I don't know if I'm allowed to tell this story. I might cut it. I don't know. We'll see. But
oh my God, tell it. Let's see what happens.
His father had passed away when he was very young, and we were talking about him one day, and I got like a really strong gut feeling. I'm like, you got to look for yellow things or something, like something yellow in somewhere you don't expect. It means he's saying hello. And then later that day we were driving, and there's like it's the middle of summer. It's not fall. And there's a yellow leaf on his windshield that just won't go away when he does the wipers, and maybe that was more of a confirmation bias of looking for it. But that was, I guess, an example of like a positive situation where someone felt comforted. So
it's good.
Oh, I like it. Ended on a positive note.
Oh, yes.
Ooh. Yeah, I think it is kind of fun, when, maybe you're missing someone who's no longer here. And, even if it's like a sign that you're like, hey, that was a sign, maybe you're looking for one. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If it,
I think that's healthy. Yeah.
I think as long as you don't take it too far, if it makes you feel better, like same with the protection stuff. Like if somebody's like, well, it doesn't do anything. It's like, but if it makes me feel safer, I don't care if it's not actually doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does something for us to feel comforted. And I think this is where kind of like the reality versus alternate realities or fantasy is worth noting. If we're still in our reality and we're doing things that help us stay in our reality comfortably, that's a positive use of these things. Whereas if we're trying to escape our reality, for a while, that was like the trend for a lot of teens also, is like shifting to try and shift alternate realities. Jessi knows this. And my theory on that as a psychotherapist is that clearly something in their current reality is so painful that they're trying to escape into another reality, because I would never think to shift. I literally have everything I've ever wanted in my life. and to be honest, I don't know that I would have shifted as a teenager, because being raised so Catholic, it was like, don't touch anything that could ever possibly bring in a window to anything negative. So I'm just like, okay, I'll just do whatever I'm supposed to do. But that was the trend for a while. Yeah.
Witch talk gives me such a headache.
Yes.
Well, and that's a big thing too, as I think a lot of like young people especially are turning away from maybe traditional religion, and they're exploring like Wiccan or pagan views or spirituality or anything. All these like kids are like, I'm going to be a witch, and they're like, I'm going to work with deities. And I'm like, okay, well, you don't know what you're doing. You're going to say like, yeah, I want to work with Lilith. And then you're going to try to call Lilith, but you don't know if you're actually talking to Lilith. And have you ever actually read anything about Lilith? Because she's not very nice. Like, yeah, that's a whole thing. I'm a pagan, and that's a whole thing that I have to tell people. I'm like, if you think you're working with an entity or a spirit, you need to verify it. You can't just assume that it's actually, because there are bad things out there that want to trick you. Yeah. And if you're dabbling in that, you need to make sure that you're protecting yourself and verifying. Like, one thing that I will do is like, I have a pendulum, and you ask the entity questions with the pendulum. And if any of those answers are incorrect based on like the factual knowledge about like, oh, you say you're like a Hellenic pagan, you want to work with Greek gods, you're going to work with Athena. If you say, is your symbol an owl, and the pendulum says no, you don't want to work with that entity because that's not Athena. That's, I mean, a very, like, I guess a very specific example, but sorry, little witch talk rant. I'm done now.
No, I mean,
we welcome the witch talk rant.
You have to verify like what you're working with. And I think because if we're coming at it from a place of boundaried curiosity, as I like to call it, the likelihood that something we don't want to enter will attempt to enter might not change, but that will allow it, that we as the recipient will allow it. It's not as risky because we're very clear about it, and whatever kind of litmus tests we're using to make sure that we're clear, that keeps us safe. Whereas if we're just like, oh, I'm open to whatever, willy-nilly, etc., and then you think about younger kids who are more likely to use Ouija boards, peer pressure, etc., they are far more likely to intentionally or unintentionally call in a far more dark or demonic force because they're showing their openness without boundary curiosity. They're just like, I'll take anything, the weirder the better. Not safe, not something that you want to welcome in. And there are a lot of spirits that are going to see that and are waiting in the shadows and lurking and waiting for somebody to go, oh, I'm open to this, show me a sign. And then they go, boom, now I'm in because you trust me and you believe me and you're going to start looking to me for cues. And then I can get you into the dark side. And then that's where the possession can start, or the ladder up to possession can start.
Oh my
So be very, very mindful who you're calling in, for what purpose, and what would be the reason. And like Jessi said, whatever litmus test that you want to use, please be doing that if you happen to dabble or venture in any sort of extra worldly, otherworldly.
And the kids are pantheon mixing. They're like, yeah, I work with all the death deities. I'm like, okay, alrighty.
Oh my God.
Because those all want to be in the same room from all these different cultures. They all would get along, for sure.
Perfectly fine, because you're so powerful. Yeah, good luck with that.
Okay, I have learned so much from the two of you. Can we make this an annual tradition that on Halloween we turn ghosted into actual ghosted?
I am so down.
Oh my God, because I feel like we could have multiple parts. I mean, both of you.
Oh, I'll dig up old emails. I'll get my research papers out. We can do this.
Yeah. I know. We got to get like flashlights.
I'm gonna cite my sources. Yeah.
Yeah, I know a lot of like mediums and spiritual leaders in the Denver area, so.
Whoa. Maybe there's a whole different podcast that's ghosted in general. Who knows? Who knows where we're going to take this?
Ghosted, but paranormal.
They're like, kind of copyright infringement. You're like, it's just one episode, don't worry.
Yeah, just one episode. Yeah, hopefully we don't get in trouble for this.
That's terrifying. I will, whatever they went through, that was creepy.
Oh my God. Like,
This was fun. This was super fun.
This is so fun. I am shook. If you need to talk to someone after listening to this, you know where to find the three of us.
Crying in a ball and no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. Just like rubbing selenite all over my body.
I will be a bundle of sage by the end of this.
But in all seriousness, if you guys are listening, you want more info, we will put that all in the show notes. Talia, do you just want to really quickly plug where people can follow you, check you out?
Yeah, sure.
Obviously not for performing exorcisms, but for other things.
I cannot do that. That is not something I'm authorized to do, nor would I want to. No, thank you. You can find me on Instagram at Talia Bombola, and this is not a topic I would regularly talk about on my social media, so don't get your hopes up. But if you have questions, I'm sure email Abby or DM me or find my website if you have very specific questions, and I'll give you some resources that you can link if people want to learn more in a boundaried curiosity, healthy for them way.
Right. And Jessi, are you cool with people reaching out to you? Where would you want them to?
Yeah, totally. You can find my personal Instagram at Jessi, Jessi, moon.xx. I went back to old emo MySpace days with the .xx.
I love that.
And I would be happy to talk about this stuff too. Although I am someone who's a little more comfortable with some of the darker stuff, just because I've been raised to protect myself my whole life. So you might want to start somewhere else, if I'm honest. I'm just a little more comfortable with things that might scare some people, but I'm also not a practitioner. I'm not a
medium.
I can recommend you some books.
Yeah.
I am a medium.
Okay.
But I don't do it for money or anything.
Got it.
But I can recommend you some books or something. And then if you want a podcast, you can email me at Jessi, Jessi, at VenusNeptuneStudios.com.
Yes, and definitely reach out to Jessi because she does an amazing job with this podcast. You guys listen to it every week. And if you're new here, you should start listening every week. Not usually like this. Next
People
time we'll be back with dating advice.
This was enough. Thank you very much.
Yeah, right? This becomes our most popular episode, and we completely change the trajectory of my entire matchmaking business. It'll be fine.
You can match people in this world to people in the other world.
Whoa, Jessi, we might need to chat about that.
Why are you limiting yourself to just
afterlife matchmaking?
Yeah, afterlife matchmaking.
Right?
Your twin flame was here, but not anymore.
And if you die single, don't worry. There's still hope for you.
There's still hope.
If you've dated everyone in this world, come to the other world.
May I introduce you to the other world?
We were going I was telling Abby right before we started that I just watched Beetlejuice. We're going full circle.
Yes.
Because there's the whole marriage scene in Beetlejuice.
Oh my God. Wow. We really brought that back around. That is a must-watch for Halloween. I need to watch that. Amazing. Well, happy Halloween, friends. Stay safe if you're out there partying. Eat some candy. Hand out candy to children in a safe way and not a weird way.
Don't use a Ouija board tonight.
Yeah, do not use a Ouija board. If you were thinking about doing it, put that shit away.
Yeah.
And thank you for joining us on this very different, very spooky, and honestly, very informative to me episode.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby.
Stay spooky, friends.